meeting of the 23rd of March held via Microsoft Teams. I would just like to welcome all of you. But before we proceed, as you know very well, all of you, that we are an institution in mourning with the passing on of our chairperson, Mr. Smunda Shedrack Mkwena. So I would also like to remind you that, in fact, the funeral will be held tomorrow, and there will be a virtual connection to that funeral service. Then just request you that to observe a moment of silence for a minute. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Let's then proceed with the meeting. Welcome once again to meeting 188. I'm struggling with my my board pad here. Maybe Gerard, I'll talk to you to assist me offline. But welcome to this PPS meeting. Any apologies, Madam Maswangai?
No, Chair, we don't have any apology.
Thank you. May you please just take us through the health, safety, as well as ethics moments?
Thank you, Chair. But Chair, I saw Mr. Kumede's hand was up.
Oh, Mr. Kumede?
Chair, I will withdraw. I thought I was going to raise a concern before we actually went live, but it's a governance matter. Sorry.
Okay. May you please just, Madam Maswangai, remind us once we have closed the meeting to attend to the matter, please. Because members always raise issues for the improvement of our functioning as this committee and the organization, and therefore we should make sure that we capture all of those. Proceed then, Madam.
Okay, Chair, noted. Good morning, members and colleagues. Please note that we are still on alert level 1 of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please note that the new COVID-19 regulations still remains that we should wear our mask, wash our hands, and keep a social distancing at all times. Members and colleagues are also reminded to Chair. Members and colleagues are also reminded to make sure that their environment that they are working in is safe and secure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. With respect to the mask, I think with the President's speech yesterday, it did indicate that outdoors people need not wear masks, but indoors they must make sure that they do wear the masks. That is on the mask side, but the rest then remain the same. And I think that Vanda has done a good job in terms of circulating that speech, and it's for us to then familiarize ourselves and act accordingly, observing all the regulations. And I think in this regard, it is also important for us to look at the draft. I think there's a draft legal document, piece of legislation that will empower the Department of Health to deal with matters that pertain to COVID-19 and not cover them under the Disaster Management Act. And I think it's very important for us to familiarize ourselves therewith and to comment when necessary, because active citizen. It's actually what is going to help to improve the country's policies and laws. So please, just with that, on the ethics side, ma'am.
Our ethics theme for this month of March is agility and innovation. Agility and innovation are fundamental for the growth and success of our organizations. Agility refers to an organization's level of responsiveness, its ability to change and adapt. Innovation is the development and implementation of new processes, services and service delivery standards to improve efficiency and effectiveness. Agility and innovation requires us to have productive meetings, creating a space where all views and ideas are heard and ventilated, create an environment that embraces and encourages experimentation, learning and improvement, promoting a human, trusting and respectful culture, bring an end to uncoordinated silo strategies, involving more people in workshops and discussions, embrace technology, making use of all available IT tools, and expose ourselves to cross functions using techniques, coaching, advanced training, and development paths. We are therefore encouraged to be more agile and innovative in the execution of our duties and to find solutions that improve efficiency and effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Masongai. I hope all of us we do internalize these ethics themes for the month, and let us do our best to actually leave them out. We'll then proceed to item 3, which is adoption of the agenda. Any comments regarding the changes that members would like to see? Mr. Kumete?
Chairperson, perhaps just half of what I wanted to raise earlier. Item 5, I'm not sure whether it's just mine, has changed 3 times. For instance, yesterday, we actually had your 2 pages here. I see today they've been removed. But before the 2 pages, there were other versions of item 5 that were. It makes it very difficult to comment, Chairperson. So I don't know. My request is not that if change is required, it might not be effected, but in consideration of those that may have read a particular version, that it should not be removed. So, for instance, I'm a big challenge with item 5, so that's why I'm raising it here in terms of the adoption of agenda. In the sense that all of my annotations were actually gone with the other versions that were there before. So I don't know, Chairperson. I'm just flagging it. I'd read it, but I'd read very different versions. It does pose a challenge, Chair.
I fully agree with you there, Mr. Kumete. The best thing is that when there's an update, the old ones are kept intact to enable those who had read earlier on to kind of still use those comments if possible. So, Madam Masongai, do you have anything to say in this regard?
Chair, apologies for the inconvenience. It was the one that was removed yesterday. It was just a matter of renaming it so that it doesn't look like a continuation of part 1 and part 2. So it was renamed part 3 and part 4, but then I realized that it would look like a continuation, so I had to rename it to part 1 updated and part 2 updated. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Yeah, because, for example, the part 2 just vanished from me, but part 1 is still there, the old part 1, item 5. So it just to say, keep the documents intact so that people can be able to refer to them irrespective. Please. right. Okay, let's then proceed. I think Madam Massetti has joined. Welcome, Madam Massetti. And we note your comment also concerning part 2 of item 5, refusing to open.
I joined before the meeting started, Chairperson, before you started the meeting. Thanks.
Okay, no, that's fine, but I never then saw you, because I was checking with each and every member. Yeah, but I note that. You may proceed then if you want to comment on this, on the agenda.
Yes, Chairperson, I'm covered. I was just saying that I encountered the same challenge as Mr. Gumede, and also indicating that item 5 part 2 was refusing to open, but there is an updated version. So I'm assuming that we only have that part 1 and part 2, and not the other versions that appeared earlier. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, members, may we then please move towards the adoption of the agenda, noting all those concerns. If you, for the adoption of the agenda for today's meeting, may you please just raise your hands. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Advocate Stole. Thank you, Madam Massetti. I also support the adoption. Having said that, then may we please then proceed to item 4, which is a declaration of interest. Please ensure that just ensure that all of us fill the declaration of interest forms and email them to the Secretariat, because not filling these also has got other implications, particularly when it comes to the auditing of our meetings. With that, are there any interest to declare verbally? Just by exception, if there are any interest to declare. Okay, I think that with no other interest to declare verbally, we then proceed to item 5, which is the decision and reasons for decision on the review of the tariff methodology for the approval of tariffs for storage and loading facilities. Madam Twa and your team.
Thank you, Chairperson. Okay, good morning, members, and good morning, colleagues. Chair, I would allow Azania to just take us through the process that we have been on this review of the tariff methodology, but maybe highlighting more from the previous meeting that we had on the 20th of January, where we presented the efficiency adjustment and the volume rules, and then focus on the comments from the public and the one-on-ones that we had with some stakeholders, and also how we've addressed the inputs from the pre-hearing that members raised. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Yokwana.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, members and colleagues. The purpose of this submission is to request the Petroleum Pipeline Subcommittee to consider and recommend to the Energy Regulator the approval of version 5 of the tariff methodology for the approval of tariffs for petroleum storage and loading facilities attached hereto as Annexure A. The approval of the transition period not exceeding 12 months in order to prepare the industry for the implementation of the efficiency adjustment factor and volume rules. Also the approval of the decision and reasons for decision on the review of the tariff methodology, and the final report on piloting of version 4.1 of the tariff methodology attached here to as Annexure C. The reason and the decision and reasons for decisions is attached here to as Annexure B. The PPS meeting of 20 January 2022 noted the draft decision on the draft tariff methodology version 5, the draft tariff methodology version 5, as well as approved for publication the consultation document in order to consult stakeholders on the draft decision, including the preliminary provision for the efficiency adjustment factor in the tariff methodology. On 24 January 2022, the energy regulator then published notices with a consultation document in order to consult the stakeholders. And the due date for the written comments was 8 March 2022. The comments that were received are attached here to as Appendix 3. On 28 February 2022, the notices inviting the public to attend a public hearing on this review of the methodology were published in the independent newspapers as well as the Bild newspapers. The public hearing was scheduled for 17 March 2022. However, NERSA did not receive any requests by stakeholders to make representations at the public hearing. Therefore, the public hearing did not take place. At the pre-hearing that was held on 17 March 2022, the Petroleum Pipelines Subcommittee panel hearing, public hearing panel members made comments and enhancements on the submission, which are contained in paragraph 5 of the two-pager submission. Also, it should be noted that there has been a few enhancements since the PPS of January 2022, where there's an additional item for the recommendations was included, and that is paragraph 2.1.2 of the two-pager document, where we request also the approval of the transition period. This was after the pre-hearing deliberations. Also, we've included the deliberations by the PPS public hearing panel members, which are contained in paragraph 5 of the two-pager document. We've also included an assessment of the objectives of the review of the methodology as Appendix 4 of the submission, and we have included the final report on the piloting of version 4.1 of the tariff methodology, which is attached here to as Annexure C. Therefore, it is recommended that the Petroleum Pipeline Subcommittee considers and recommends to the energy regulator the approval and publication of version 5 of the tariff methodology for the approval of tariffs for petroleum storage and loading facilities attached here to as Annexure A. The following are the salient features of version 5 of the methodology, which makes it differ from version 4. That is, the deferred tax component has been removed in the regulatory asset-based formula to align to the flow-through tax allowance. The assets that are fully depreciated yet still in use are not included in the regulatory asset-based formula. In the net working capital formula, the minimum cash balance component has been removed as the operating cash is deemed to serve the same purpose. The risk-free rate and the market risk premium will be estimated based on the data for the preceding 360 months, where previously it was 300 months. The liquidity risk premium is also excluded in version 5. The flow-through tax is the only tax approach to be used in the allowable revenue determination formula, and there's an introduction of the provision for efficiency benchmarking through volume rules. It is also recommended that the PPS considers and recommends to the energy regulator the approval of the transition period not exceeding 12 months in order to prepare the industry for the implementation of the efficiency adjustment factor through volume rules. the approval of the decision and reasons for decisions on the review of the tariff methodology for the approval of tariffs for petroleum storage and loading facilities attached here to as Annex B, and the approval of the final report on the piloting of version 4.1 of the tariff methodology attached here to as Annex C. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Yogana. Is there anything you want to add, Madam Bogo or Madam Mtwa?
No, Chairperson. Thank you.
All right.
Nothing from my side. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, I would just then love to give you an opportunity to make comments, ask any questions, and give guidance. And I must again appreciate the invaluable inputs made during the pre-hearing meeting. It has helped in terms of enhancing the document. And I think the team has already echoed apologies around the documents. And let's just make sure that going to the PPS from here to the ER from here, we make sure that the documents are properly loaded onto the system to bring more confusion to members. Having said that, members, the board is now in your court if you want to make any comments, ask questions, or provide guidance. Mr. Kumete, and then Madam Maseti, and then Advocate Stoll. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairperson. Again, as I've indicated, I'm a bit handicapped in respect of my comments because I can't make reference to the areas where I may have raised issues. But I am going to still raise the issues that I still remember from memory in respect of where, in my reading, where I'd highlighted. And by the way, even the other items which include the updated, which include the aspect, the updated 2 pages, because unfortunately you had we also had 2 pages here, which I must admit I wasn't quite sure why the 2 pages were attached here, because I would assume that the 2 pages are for the ER, but nonetheless, some of my comments actually were actually linked to the issues raised in the 2 page. I can't see them, so I'm going to raise 2 issues, Chairperson. The one that I've raised a number of times before, which I'm still not sure I have been provided sufficient response to. So for me, if I read section 4F, section 4F of the Petroleum Pipelines Act, it says set to approved tariffs and charges in a manner prescribed by regulation. Chairperson, I get very concerned when we have an act that states something, and in my opinion, and this is where I need guidance again, maybe just reassurance again, that because this is clear, it's in a manner prescribed by regulation. It's not even one of those under, say, for instance, in the Gas Act, just says in a manner prescribed, which could be read prescribed by rules or prescribed by regulation. Then you actually need to go to the regulation section to actually make headway in terms of what was the intention of the lawmaker. But this one is clear. So I'm a little confused, Chairperson, that says, so if we've got a methodology, should that not be prescribed? Is that not what the Act is saying? So the changes, should those changes not be coming from the DMRE? Are we not usurping the powers of the minister in respect of that prescription? So it's just that perhaps maybe have been responded to earlier, but I'm still unclear on this. Because for me, prescribed by regulation means prescribed by regulation. It doesn't give anybody else any powers to do anything else in respect of those tariffs. So that's the first issue. The second key issue, Chair, is that again in reading this, in respect of how we're going about with this tariff methodology, is that for me it kind of comes across as somehow we are regulating revenue, whether we call it regulating allowable revenue or not. And I'll then ask the question in respect of what's in the Act, because the Act talks about setting or approving tariffs and charges. There's no revenue regulation there. Any inference to regulating revenue, which I guess in the Electricity Act is explicit, it's there. But in these other pieces of legislation, it is not. Because a lot of the issues that then come up, clawback and what have you, are if you like, are in us regulating revenue. I then ask the question, where in the Act do we draw that? Firstly, let's forget about 4F. Even if 4F has been addressed, that we do have the powers to actually write the actual to actually design and come up with and prescribe a methodology. But having done that, where in the Act does it say we can regulate revenue? Because regulating tariffs and regulating revenue are very different things in the manner, even the things that then come out because of that. So those are my two key issues, Chairperson. I can't raise any other details because all my annotations are lost. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Madam Massetti.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson, I'll start off with a question that is similar to that of Mr. Gumede, and this is in part 2, the updated part 2, where we say that licensees may submit their applications using their own methodologies, or use this methodology as a guide. Perhaps, I don't know, I think my concern is similar to the one that Mr. Gumede raised, because sometimes we come across challenges by licensees when we indicate that the methodology is a guide. And I know that in gas we said it's a guidelines, but we did not put the words in the actual methodology to say it is a guide. We have just indicated that we provide the 5 options, like different methodologies, and then we say that licensees must select from the 5 that we have provided, or if there is any other methodology that is internationally recognized, and then we state that the licensee may use that methodology. And then we go on to say that NERSA will then, for purposes of independent verification, will then use perhaps that methodology together with the one that we have in order just to check the outcomes that we see in the 2 methodologies for verification purposes. So I wanted to just check if perhaps we don't want to tweak the wording that we have there, or is it intentional that we just want to say that let them use their own methodologies? And number 2, this one can just be used as a guide. Is it intentional that it be a methodology that is merely used as a sort of a competitive benchmark, so to speak, for verification, if this one is going to be used as a guide and perhaps just to verify the outcomes? Shouldn't we rather follow the process that we were advised previously, even by legal services, where they will use the methodology? However, if there are adverse consequences of the methodology that is adopted by NERSA, then they must give reasons. And I think that there were also cases that were quoted, I think when Guess made some submissions. So if there are good reasons why why stakeholders need to deviate from the methodology, it is at that point that the issue of deviation from the methodology will be considered, so that it is not a rule book. But if then we anticipate that adverse outcomes will result from the methodology, and such must be set out clearly, and also show what is the negative effect, and then make then proposals to deviate, so that one can look at the reasonableness of deviating from the methodology. Is that perhaps something? Is that perhaps an approach that we could rather follow here, instead of just saying that this is just a guide? So I just thought, let me just bring that perspective. And then, Chairperson, we also say that the energy regulator may consider unforeseen relevant factors in the determination of the tariffs, but we don't state what are those factors. Just to give an example of such factors that we say will be unforeseen. If we can give an example, just at the principal level, or the high level, what such factors will be that are not covered yet in the methodology, but may be things that the energy regulator may want to consider. Then on the issue of the transition period, we are saying that the transition period is up to 12 months after the publication of the methodology. Would it not be better if we say that 12 months after the approval by the energy regulator? Because then it gives us an opportunity, if this methodology is approved by 31st of March, then we know that it will exist until next year, next year March. Then then the implementation will begin on 1st April 2023. So in that way, it will work well also, because it will be aligned to the financial, the financial year, the commencement of the financial year of the applicant, of the licensees. So I thought perhaps we may want to do that, because if the publication is delayed by 2 months or a month, for instance, then it might mean that we only start in May of 2023. So I thought that it would be good even for RRMs and for RFRs if we then say that it's 12 months from the approval by the energy regulator, rather than to wait for staff to publish it. So staff must just publish it in time to make sure that the implementation takes place by 1st of April 2023. And then, Chairperson, I made mention of the piloting of the volume rules, and I would like to understand if that is possible, maybe given the challenges with the data. Would it, just to also prepare the industry and familiarize them with this concept? Given the fact that they stated it is something that is new and might be complex. So I was wondering if we could rather pilot it, and also we will get a sense of what challenges have the industry encountered during the course of 12 months before then it gets implemented, say by April of next year. So if that can also be responded to, so that we can get a better sense of what the challenge is, if then it is just implemented on a pilot basis, and just to see if we'll have data, and also appreciate what challenges we anticipate the industry might be faced with after 12 months on this. And I think that could be part of the transitional arrangement. Then coming to the issues of the RRM, which we actually requested the team to also look at. I haven't had and I haven't picked up the summary on that, just to see if some of the proposed changes and measures contained in here, whether they are aligned with the RRM project and the things that we said should be done under the RRM project. If that can be commented on, so that we understand what the approach is, as we then approve the methodology or consider the methodology, so that it is sort of it anticipates any changes that may take place through the RRM project, and that is so that we don't keep on amending the methodology to accommodate what the RRM's project would require. I think that's all, Chairperson, from my side for now. I may come back just to check my notes. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Massetti. I just want to then give an opportunity to the team to respond. From the legal side, I think it will help maybe if Las can assist with also just to reflect on the issue of prescription by regulation, as opposed to the situation where NERSA develops and approves the methodology vis-a-vis that being done by DMRE, and then the issue of around the regulation of revenue instead of tariffs, and the third thing that Last you may just weigh in afterwards is also on the issue of the approach we're taking. Because my understanding was that the methodology acts as a guide, but it is one that the NERSA will actually use for assessment, and not just to say it's verifying the outcome. But the other approach is to say stick to this and deviate where you consider it prudent to do so, but for good reason. So provide reasons for such deviation. So it becomes more of a deviation if they use a different methodology. So if you can also comment on that. But for now, let me give you Madam Mtwa and your team. Then you can bring in Last. Let me leave it up to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Maybe just to first clarify maybe the issue of the 2-page, maybe we could have presented it in a different way, but we needed to highlight how we've addressed all the comments that came up from the public hearing, so that it's clear where we have addressed them and how we have addressed them. Hence, we've included it in this updated documentation. And then when it's come to piloting, it was the understanding that during the transition period, we will then do the piloting of the volume rules, because then we'll be able to engage with the stakeholders and get the necessary data that we need to do that part of the pilot. And then also in terms of the regulation of the tariff, I think the understanding is that the allowable revenue and the volumes from are the major part of the formula that it results to a tariff. Hence the link in terms of the regulation of the tariffs. But I'll allow Ms. Boko maybe to go into details with that, and then maybe Last to come in then at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairperson. I was talking to Ra to assist in responding to the issue of revenue, us regulating revenues versus tariffs, because they're working on a project to where they seek to clarify this matter. So I think we'll request Ra to go into details in terms of responding to that question. And then maybe, Chairperson, touching on the use of the methodology as just a guide. I think what we should do, depending on the outcome of this of the deliberations, is to then add the second element, where we would indicate that deviations will be considered, and in circumstances where implementation of this methodology may result in adverse effects for the licensee, as suggested by Ms. Maseti. So we'll be guided by you on that element. But the reason for us putting that that paragraph there was to allow for use of various business models by licensees. But then, as you have also indicated, that we require all information that would need as NESA in implementing this methodology. And then Chair will add the examples of the unforeseen circumstances that may warrant deviation from the methodology or consideration of factors that are not explicitly stated in this methodology. And Chair, with regards to the RRM and alignment therewith, the proposed methodology is aligned with Volume 1 of the RRMs. Members will recall that Volume 1 was recently reviewed by RAR, and then we requested RAR to stall on the review of Volume 4, which is specific to petroleum pipelines, because we wanted to finalize the review of this methodology, so that if there are elements that warrant inclusion in Volume 4, we do so. So the way we did it was the review of the methodology first, and then the review of Volume 4. I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Last.
Thank you, Chairperson. Our understanding, Chairperson, of Section 4, subsection F, is that the legislation is giving the energy regulator power to set the tariff, but then again, it's not conclusive in terms of how then is the regulator going to exercise that power. It make a cross reference to the regulation. That's why when you get to the regulation, the regulation will talk of the methodology, and that methodology, that is the how part, what's being referred to in terms of the section 4, subsection 4, Chairperson. Thank you.
So what does that mean in terms of who should approve, who should gazette the methodology, develop and approve the methodology?
Chairperson, that should be the energy regulator, Chairperson. This is how it has always been. That is our understanding in terms of what is being referred to in the regulation, Chairperson.
Okay. I think I was hoping that you are going to when you talk, refer to the you refer to the regulation, because the regulations is supposed to prescribe, and then from the regulations it then empowers NERSA to then develop a fitting methodology that is aligned with the principles that are set out in the Act, as well as what the regulation then require. So it is, one can see it as a continuation of that delegation, but emanating from the regulations, which is then not ultra vires in terms of the Act. So if you can help to articulate it clearly in that fashion. Mr. Kumede, you want to have a follow-up, please?
Chairperson, just a quick follow-up. I think for me, Chair, and I know that sometimes this may not be seen as a proper guide. The regulator has been, in a number of cases, I know that in electricity we are facing a number of these issues at the moment. We cannot give ourselves powers we do not have. We cannot. In this particular case, 4F is very clear, it's in a manner prescribed, and if you go to section 33.1, it does say that 33(1)H says minister may make regulations on any matter that may or has to be prescribed. There's nothing similar in respect of 33(3). We don't have that power. What I'm simply saying here, Chairperson, is that I think it's a guide that simply says the fact that we may have done something in a particular way in the past, if you can't hang it in the law and go to the law itself and say section this of the act state this, and therefore based on that, this is what I'm doing, it is incorrect, Chairperson. That's the first issue. So for me, from where I'm sitting, by the way, sorry, in the first issue, Chair, is that I wish colleagues could take what I'm saying as a guide, because it is going to be important in if somebody were to challenge a decision and ask you in particular and say, which section of the act did you rely on to actually do this action that you are doing? We must be able to go directly to that section, and actually it must be explicit. Yes, there might be interpretation that the High Court may still afford, but it must be something that's in the act. If it's not in the act, we are not empowered to do. We cannot write laws. Parliament write laws, we don't write law. That's number one. Number two, I just wanted to raise my view in respect of petroleum pipelines, whether these methodologies are a guide or they're prescriptive. See, I'd always read it this way, that because in the Petroleum Pipelines Act, it does say set or approved tariffs in the manner prescribed by regulation, is that in that particular case, it makes those methodologies, it makes them laws. But yes, in respect of storage, because we are only approving, although the methodology is a law, is not a guide, it is a law, is a law subservient to the Principal Act, yes, but it is a law because it's actually a regulation. Because it's only used for the purposes of approval, is that it's used in that particular case, perhaps that's where the guide thing comes from. But it's only, so what it says, the regulator will use this methodology to approve the tariff. But because it does not set the storage tariff, it only approves it. It uses that as a guide to say, but it's guiding the energy regulator in approving it's guiding the regulator in approving the tariff. So I guess in that particular case for storage, that's the only time it can be read as a guide and not prescriptive. Although the actual act says set or approved in a manner prescribed by regulation, and therefore in the Petroleum Pipelines Act, it is actually prescribed. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumet. I think when the team writes in terms of the legal provision, or in terms of the under which the authority as well as the legal mandate, so to say, it's going to be important to talk from the section 4 and then go to the regulations, and then the regulations relate to the methodology, just to provide clarity in this instance. Because if you look at the regulations now, you go to regulation 4, which is for the setting of tariffs for petroleum pipelines, as well as regulation 5, which is approval of tariffs for loading and storage facilities. All right. If the prescription is provided there in terms of what the authority, now being the energy regulator, must do in terms of considerations like the batch size, the capacity to take the petroleum into a storage facility, the throughput capacity of loading facilities, and any other relevant matter. This then becomes now the marching orders for the authority, which is NERSA in this regard. So there is, in other words, it then becomes a further delegation to the regulator. And for the regulator to do this in a transparent, consistent, fair manner, there must be this development of a methodology against which then all the licenses would be measured or assessed, right, such that there is no one who second guesses how the authority is going to treat their applications. So it is in that context. That is why I was saying that, Mr. Mbetsi, you would have done us a lot of good by just explaining that flow. Because if you move from the act to the methodology, then it becomes a problem. Or you stop where the act mandates the regulations to then prescribe. You also don't do us a favor, because you must then look at the whole value chain until you get to the methodology itself, or the whole process flow. So that is how I think the team in improving the issue of the legal mandate, you need to structure this these paragraphs just to explain that you're moving from act to regulation to rules and the methodology, then to practically deal with the matter, because the practicality is not actually dealt with exhaustively in the regulations alone. Okay, that is the only guidance I can provide in this regard. I can see that there's also another hand up. Mutsau and Chokwe, and then Mutsau.
Thank you, Chairperson. The issue that has been raised by Mr. Gumede is something that we are investigating, but what we have so far, Chairperson, is that the legislation itself through the Act and the regulations that are read together with the Act, they empower the energy regulator to establish a methodology through which a tariff shall be set. But however, it does not go on to the extent of expressly prescribing how such a methodology is going to be established. But in doing so, the principle of rationality shall then reign to say when the methodology is established, the allowable revenue is a numerator to the formula that the energy regulator is going to use to set the tariff, such that each and every component of the allowable revenue formula is methodically established. So in following that sequence, then this kind of sequence is emanating from the manner in which we appreciate the guidance that is provided to us through a regulatory finance theory, to which we then align ourselves also to international best practice to see whether the manner in which we have implemented this theoretical support is consistent with international regulatory practice, which has been done so far. So at the end of the day, it becomes an interpretation issue because the power to do so is there, but how part of it is not expressly stated. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Mutsau. Mr. Chokwe?
Thanks, Chairperson. I am aligned with Mr. Mbedze, but I think indeed maybe some of us, we may have to maybe sit down with Mr. Gumede and actually try to figure out actually the main issue, because Chairperson, you are so right to say we emanate from the Act and we go to the regulations. If you check Section 28 of the Petroleum Pipelines Act, I think that's where you are going to be seeing where this methodology comes from. But as Mr. Mutsau has just said, Chairperson, it's going to be giving you some just highlights, some highlights of things that should happen. If you check Section 28, actually 3 is going to actually indicate that the tariffs set or approved by the authority must enable this license to do 1, 2, 3. But you go to regulation 4.4, where you are seeing the same things, but actually worded differently. But the methodology itself is coming from the Act to say that the tariffs must be based on this systematic methodology. But as Mr. Mutsawu has indicated, they just actually give the highlights, and how these things should be done are in the regulations. But I think we would want to agree with Gumeda to say, let's try to look where are we emanating from, because he's right to say, if we can't base whatever thing that we say from the Act, then we are on a very slippery ground. But what Mr. Mbeze has just said, I'm actually aligned with him to say, indeed, the energy regulator has the power to develop this methodology, but how this methodology, the contents, the ingredients of this methodology, you are going to be finding them in the regulation. Chaps, let me stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we've dealt with the issue of the transition period and the piloting, as well as the RRM, where RAR is also going to come in. I think it would also help, RAR, if you can just outside of this, even if it's outside of the meeting, communicate in terms of the plan around the issue of providing this clarification of revenue regulation vis-a-vis tariff regulation. I think we have exhausted the matters here, and I would like us to move towards a decision based on recommendation, which is on page 6 of 59 for the updated part 1, which is under paragraph 7, starting from 7.1 to 7.14. I would then want to see by show of hands if you support the recommendation under 7.1. By show of hands, members, taking due regard of the comments made, as well as the guidance and inputs and responses to the questions that were made to enhance the document. Thank you, Madam Advocate Tole. Madam Assetti? Yes, Madam Assetti, Mr. Kumede.
Chairperson, I think this time around, I will definitely, I would not support personally until I have been, I think this time around, all the issues I've raised that I've actually been sufficiently addressed. I don't feel I am, Chair.
Okay. I think the issue of being not ultra virus was before we can move towards a decision being like voting. I think it's important to be able to persuade you as such with regard to the issue that these matters, like the issue of being prescribed by regulation, that the regulations, as pointed out by regulation 4 and 5, they do then of themselves empower the regulator to then develop the rules and methodologies to address this issue that you have raised. And the second one being the revenue regulation that is still going to be clarified by way of a project that is being undertaken by RAR. But of importance is that with the revenue being part of the formula of tariff determination, one has got to look at each and every element or aspect of that formula to come to the tariff. Hence, then, this challenge of the two being seen to be like intertwined, such that it's in some instances, it's just difficult to separate by way of saying you're regulating one and not the other. So just like to get your view on that one.
No, Chairperson, I was just raising to say there are 3 members that are supporting. I'm just flagging my discomfort and therefore not supporting, but there is no reason why the actual decision that doesn't carry, Chair. And as part of the committee, whatever the decision of the committee is binding on me, but I am raising it as something that I am not sufficiently addressed, Chairperson. But what I'm simply that I don't want to hold back this. There's a decision of the committee, and the decision of the committee is binding on me, and it actually carries. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you for that. So I also support. So from my side, noting what Mr. Gumede said, but I still insist on RAR as well as LAS moving quickly in terms of providing clarity, especially going to ER, which is in a matter of a few days, as the ER is on the 31st of March. So the Petroleum Pipeline Subcommittee has considered and recommended to the energy regulator the approval and publication of version 5 of the tariff methodology for the approval of tariffs for petroleum storage and loading facilities attached here to as Annex A. The following are the salient features of version 5 of the methodology, which makes it different from version 4. The deferred tax component has been removed in the regulated asset base, the RAP formula, to align to the flow-through tax allowance. Assets that are fully depreciated yet still in use are not included in the RAP. In the net working capital formula, the minimum cash balance component has been removed as the operating cash is deemed to serve the same purpose. The risk-free rate and market risk premium will be estimated based on data for the preceding 360 months as compared to previously being 300 months. The liquidity risk premium is excluded in version 5. The flow-through tax is the only tax approach to be used in the allowable revenue determination formula. The introduction of the provision of efficiency benchmarking through volume rules. The second issue is that the approval of the tariff of the transition period not exceeding 12 months after the approval of the energy regulator in order to prepare the industry for the implementation of the efficiency adjustment factor and volume rules. Thirdly, the approval of the decision and reasons for decision on the review of the tariff methodology for the approval of tariffs for the petroleum storage and loading facilities, which is attached as Annex B. And fourthly and lastly, the approval of the final report on piloting of version 4.1 of the tariff methodology for the approval of tariffs for the petroleum storage and loading facilities attached as Annex C. It should be noted that this recommendation is endorsed based on the enhancement that is going to be made on all the relevant documents based on the comments, guidance and guidance provided by members in this meeting. We then proceed to item 6, which is the Regulatory Advocacy Report, Petroleum Pipelines Regulation Division. If you can just quickly take us through.
Thank you, Chairperson. Without wasting time, I'll just allow Mr. Ntumule to just take the members through the report.
If you may just take it as read and that highlight key issues, please.
Good. Thank you, PPS members and colleagues. The PPR division is here to present the PPS report on regulatory advocacy amid the improvement of the regulatory framework provided through legislation, published government policies, and methodology for the petroleum pipelines industry. The purpose for this report is to request the Petroleum Pipeline Subcommittee to note the Petroleum Pipeline Regulation Division Regulatory Advocacy Report. In terms of the section delegated authority, in terms of section 1.3 of the Petroleum Pipelines Delegation Matrix approved by the Energy Regulator of 3 June 2021, documents relating to the status, quarterly, and progress reports on information gathered on the petroleum pipeline activities must be tabled before the PPS for noting purposes. Just to save time, I'll just go through only a few meetings because there are many meetings they discuss. There's one meeting which I will have to take the members through to say through the regulatory advocacy where the meeting and participated, and also with the DMRE and make comments on the biofuel and clean fuel, and those comments were submitted to the DMRE on 2nd June 2021. When also on 3rd March 2021, when the PPT had a meeting with Competition Commission, and that meeting also at the end of the day, it produced a draft the draft guidelines, which was approved by PPS on 24 February 2022. Just also to safeguard the time, members, I will say based on the above engagement, the PPR division managed to achieve the following. As I indicated on 24 February, the draft guidelines on JV were approved by PPS. And so also the establishment of a task team to discuss changing landscape of the petroleum sector was formed between the DMRE and NERSA. And also through that discussion, we're able to provide input to the amendments of the regulation as part of the objective of NERSA. Members, just to safeguard time as requested, it is recommended that the PPS note the report attached here to as Annexure A on the regulatory advocacy aimed at the improvement of the regulatory framework provided through legislation, public government policies, and methodology for the petroleum pipeline industry. And also, as the last thing, members, I do apologize for finger error on 5.12. 2021 was not spelled correctly. My apologies on that. Thank you, members.
I see your hand is up, Madam Mtwa, if you may just weigh in.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to remind members that in the strategic planning, there was a resolution that going to the next financial year, we'll then have 2 reports instead of 1. And that also we will, as regulatory EMs, we are working on an approach to see how we can maybe change the approach on regulatory advocacy, because we've noticed that some of the initiatives that have been there have not been bearing a great fruit as we would like them. So there is a committee that has been formed, led by the electricity EM, which is working on the approach, and I think we are required to come up with the procedure by November this year. So just those 2 that I needed to add in terms of the changes based on the strategic planning outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. I also like to give the opportunity to Advocate Stoller.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, mine is just to find out from the team if the amendments to the regulation on mandatory biofuels blending have now been finalized, because I think it's important for us to follow that process through now that we've submitted comments, such that if they have been finalized, if there's a need for us to change some of our regulatory activities within petroleum pipeline, we need to do that such that there is alignment between what we need to do and these particular regulations. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's also the key issue around the tactical planning with regard to advocacy, which Madam Mtwa already alluded to. It's going to be very important that that task is executed expeditiously. And if we can be given a project plan at the relevant platform, Madam Mtwa and the other EMs, it's going to be important to do that so that we know when to expect improvements in this regard. I look, for example, at 6.8, where we've got the approval of the defragmentation of regulations of the regulation of downstream petroleum industry value chain for consultation, which was approved by ER on 26th of August 2021, but is still saying yet to be discussed. So it's important that such things, we have an approach that is more outcomes-based or output-based rather than input. So if you can just work on this thing, because otherwise we're just going to be coming here to talk more about our activities and not so much of the results of those activities, which are actually the key aspect, something that's going to be able to take us forward as a regulator and the improvement of the regulation of the sector. Having said that, I've noted that Madam Advocate Stoll has already posed the question. Is there anyone else, members, that wants to pose any question in this regard or provide guidance? I take it that there is none. Oh, there is Mr. Kumete.
Chairperson, just one question on my side. We know that there is a presidential project or program in respect of improving or reducing barriers to entry or making it easy for small business or businesses to operate in South Africa. Are we participating in that? Should we not have an initiative and the integral part of that, not just as one division, but as NESA in all divisions, to see, so that we actually our voice is also heard in those platforms. Because if our voice is not there, then clearly people might make decisions that might affect our regulatory approach. But maybe, Chair, whilst I'm on the platform, I would really like to urge that this project that has been indicated by the EM, that which is this interdivisional in terms of advocacy, can it be expedited? I mean, we have a lot of issues. We need to have a number of initiatives here in this regard that will assist us in the main by also just having seminars, workshops out there to educate, because it's not just the advocacy, it's also us being able to collate information from the stakeholders, analyze it properly, communicate it to the policymaker in respect of our own interpretation. So it really, I do believe we are missing out there in respect of that. Yes, we engage in terms of public hearings on matters that are up for which are being applied for tariffs or licenses, but in respect of the issues that impact on those decisions, I do believe we are far lacking. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Mr. Kumede. Madam Masetti.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, on the issue of the sharing of information amongst the JV partners, I was going to perhaps say that perhaps in this submission we need to emphasize the nature of such information that may be shared and the purpose of it. Because the only information that must be shared, I think it must be on a limited basis, and it must only be information that will be utilized for the establishment of that JV and for the activities of the JV. So that must be the purpose for which that information is shared, but also the nature of that particular information becomes important. So I think that should be the emphasis on the extent and the scope of sharing of information by the JV partners, because you must remember that the JV partners, at least what we have seen, is that they are competitors themselves. So it is important that competition must still exist amongst themselves. But when it comes to the JV, they must make an effort for the activities of the JV to continue, and therefore, hence we then need to make it clear that the limitations and the scope of the nature of the information that must be shared is the information that is mainly for assisting the activities of the JV, and it must be for that purpose and that purpose alone, and that it is expected that the parties at another level, as they are potential competitors, they are expected to still be competing with each other with regards to storage facilities and other facilities that we regulate. I think that is important. And then with the other sections here where we make mention to the Competition Commission being approached, I think there it should be, because I don't think that it was an opinion per se that was obtained there. Perhaps it was just clarification on the extent to which the JV partners may share information. I think they do two things. They do clarification, and there's a separate process for clarification, and they also do opinions. So I don't think that, and one of them gets, you have to pay for it. So I don't think that this was an advice by the commission or the guidance by the commission per se. So it might just be a clarification. So we may just need to confine it to that. Otherwise, they were not advising us or providing guidance to us, but providing clarification on the extent to which the JV partners may fall foul of the Competition Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. In the interest of time, I just want us to then, Madam Twa, when you respond, just to note the issues that pertain to enhancement or improvements. When it comes to the issue of maybe starting from the last comment to say in terms of the clarification vis-a-vis opinion, make sure that you in the document you use the correct term, which in this case is likely to be providing the provision of a clarification instead of an opinion. So make sure that you use a correct one. With regard to the kind of information for JVs, in terms of the extent and scope of the nature of information that should be shared, which is the information for the purposes of the work of the JV, because these are potential competitors. So you need just to mention that it is within the confines of the Competition Act as well as other relevant legislation in terms of the information to be shared. Because I think the issue of the extent and scope was also covered when we're looking at this submission. When we supported the recommendation regarding what needs to be done with regard to the sharing of information by JV partners. And then with regard to the presidential projects, I think it also comes to your space, CEO, Advocate Stole. In terms of, I think it's important in terms of the environmental scan to be on an ongoing basis. I think in as much as LAS will provide a report with regard to what the legislation changes are, which may impact or have a bearing on the work of the regulator. When they provide that kind of report, there should be a report also that looks at developments elsewhere where we, as part of this regulatory advocacy. I think you need to then look at it like that when we are working with other EMs, Madam Twa, in terms of it being seen also as being part of that environmental scan, to then provide that kind of updates and see how we can be influencing that, as well as how we get certain thing impacting on us. If it's a negative impact, how we mitigate that. If it's a positive impact, how we also maximize that positive impact. I will then also highlight, Madam Twa, that when you're looking at that, also consider the functioning of the capacity building steering committee. Those workshops, they assist and implore your fellow EMs to also provide topics to be presented there, so that we minimize a lot of overloading these committees or with work which could be done elsewhere, and then we kind of provide a high-level summary here. Having said that, you may then respond particularly on the issue of biofuels.
Thank you, Chairperson. The amendment of mandatory biofuel blending regulation with petrol and diesel and the petroleum product specification and standard, those two gazettes have been gazetted by DMRE and they have become law. That's how we can respond to say they are law now and they've been gazetted last year by the DMRE, as we have responded to Member City and Mr. Gumede. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think also it's going to be important to look at these things on an ongoing basis as to the impact, as you also appreciate that once a facility is actually a blending facility for biofuels, it then, based on the current legislation, how things are structured, it becomes a manufacturing facility, and therefore is out of the Petroleum Pipelines Act and falls within the Petroleum Products Act. So those are, well, just to say that this becomes an ongoing issue. It's not just a stop and start. Please note that. We'll then proceed if there are no further comments or questions or further guidance to then go to the recommendation on page 7 of 16, stating that it is recommended that the PPS notes the report attached here to as Annexure A on regulatory advocacy aimed at the improvement of the regulatory framework provided through legislation, publish government policies and methodologies for the petroleum pipelines industry. Should you support the noting, members? Please raise your hands. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Advocate Tole. Thank you, Madam Maseti. I also do support the noting. This then concludes item 6, and we move to item 7, which is a report on the geographical spread of licenses issued for petroleum pipelines infrastructure.
Good morning, Chair and members. All protocols observed, but in the interest of time, the EM has agreed that I just start the introduction and then hand over to Mr. Balu for some details. Just 1 or 2 comments. The members will note that the title has been changed based on the strategic planning, that we had to consolidate these 2 reports into one. So as we report, you'll see there's reference to a first report, but that was only on the one aspect, which is now being combined. I think I want to take the members straight to the section on part 1, which I will be speaking to. In terms of the applications processed during the financial year to date, since this report was drafted to serve at the PPS of 9 March, there's been some developments. In fact, 3 applications has been added, so it's a total of 23. On the other hand, 4 applications has also been finalized since, which is still shown in that table as being in progress. And that we will then just update the actual report to circulate for record purposes. Having said that, in terms of the new entrance aspect, the definition we gave there is a narrow definition, in the sense that here we are looking at BEE, new entrants, more than just new players, but in the last year's report, there was also that aspect, but now the focus here is just on a BE aspect of the new entrants. And then, having said that, the new entrant here in this case is Lanele, which was approved during the past financial year by the energy regulator. And if we compare this to last year, then it was Napot, also in Ambrose Park. So that is where the 2 key projects, which in later in the report, Mr. Balu will indicate the impact or the potential impact of that in terms of the license capacity. We haven't. The latest update was considered of the progress report for this project was considered by the PPS in terms of noting that compliance report earlier in this month. So I'll not go into details that, but this is another project which is very relevant given the refinery challenges that we've got in Durban in terms of then moving to import mode, which in the long term these projects are then critical for. So I think it's a very positive development that 100% BEE party has now got the opportunity to play a role in that. In terms of engagement with potential new entrants, we've seen that this is very critical for success because both these other two parties were unsuccessful on their first attempts and had to reapply. So the members also, the ER actually instructed us as staff to enhance, review the licensing guidelines. That was done, and just on that point, I think it still shows as to be approved in this report. Subsequently, it was approved by the energy regulator and will be implemented basically from the 1st of April. So when we meet with these applicants, and I think it also linked to what I think Mr. Gumede said, that we need to educate what is our role and facilitate and share information. And that is shown then in table 3 of the report. With that, I want to move over just to part 2 of the report, which is actually the geographic spread. But I want to just address the portal aspect, which the members, if one refers to the meeting minutes of this report last year, this time focused on PPR, if I may use the term, catching up in terms of the use of the portal. And I've listed the developments in the cover submission in terms of what has happened. Our GIS specialist, unfortunately, is not able to join us today, but I think this will come to the REC in terms of it being a cross-cutting project. Here, the focus was just the petroleum aspect of it, which I've given the update. And you'll see in the report, compared to last year, we actually now have some screenshots taken from the portal. However, I would have liked to give a demonstration here, but I think that will come to REC. The real benefit of that portal is to use it interactively, where you can zoom in, zoom out, put dashboards, and measure distances. So it's really based on the short time, there's huge potential, but that will come. The bottom line is we've now added some geographic spreads.
We have to evaluate
Area snapshots taken from the actual portal. But apologies, you do lose the quality in importing it. With that, I want to ask Mr. Barlow to just focus on really the key changes, developments in the past 12 months compared to last year this time, because the same reporting format was used last year. It's just now been updated. Mr. Barlow.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, Chair, members and colleagues. I'd just like to take you through quickly part 2 of the report, which is the report on the geographic spread of the licenses issued for petroleum pipelines infrastructure. The first report served on the 4th of March 2021, and this is the second report to the PPS. Table on page 3 under paragraph 11 details the enhancements that have been made to this particular report. Table 22 on page 41 compares the facilities for 2021 and 2022, and there is GIS mapping in figure 13 of the storage facilities. In conclusion, the licensed infrastructure as at the 31st of December 2022, there are 181 storage facilities with a licensed capacity of 12.93 million cubic meters. This includes facilities owned by SFF in Milnerton, SFF in Saldanha Bay, and recently OTMS in Saldanha Bay as well. We have 25 loading facilities and 18 pipeline facilities. The provinces with the most licensed facilities remain the Western Cape, KZN, and Gauteng. And majority of the infrastructure is still owned and operated by the major oil companies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I note that this is a move in the right direction, particularly when it comes to the utilization of GIS. And I had engaged with the team, also members, and emphasized the issue of breaking the silos by interacting with the other division, particularly Tricity, as they have got the infrastructure planning side of things. And it is important to also learn from their experience and expertise in improving this. And this also is important with regard to the whole work of policymakers. That is important to feedback to policymakers in terms of where they see the infrastructure going and how they can be able to deal with that. Particularly when one look also at the LPG strategy and other specific matters, which one needs to look at it from the supply side, the demand side, and not only look at it from the supply side. And then lastly, there is figure 12 members, which is a Transnet pipeline system. With the recent product thefts, I mean, we've got an idea that this should be treated as confidential, but we go to other platforms, we see them not treating it as such. So it's a bit confusing. We'll also require clarification from them in this regard. Other than that, members, the floor now is yours to comment, ask questions, or provide guidance, if any. Mr. Kumete.
Chairperson, I'm happy to note the report. Just for enhancement, I think when I was reading the table on page 41 or 44, which was for me a nice summary of the issues of the tanks, especially taking into account that the issue has been raised by Mr. Untid, that as we move from being a refining country to an import-based country, we need to be able to see whether we've got the ability and in terms of the facilities, both in terms of pipelines linked to storage, to importing storage, and also the actual storage facilities, to be able to significantly support the economy, even when we are not refining. So what I was looking at is that to be useful, I think in terms of that nice table, table 22, that if we could split that table into, for me, I think 4 different categories. For instance, when I first saw that 71% Western Cape, it kind of said it doesn't really make sense. But then I saw that it actually includes all of the other tanks as well, the actual strategic stocks tanks. So the question I'm then saying is that is it not possible to then, in terms of value add, to actually explicitly split those? A nice table like that is a nice summary to indicate what are the crude tanks, what are the strategic crude tanks, what are the operational crude tanks, the sizes, capabilities they are, what are the strategic tanks of that, and then also to then maybe further break it down to indicate which of those tanks are primary, secondary, or tertiary tanks, so that at least in looking at this, one could see at just a face value which in terms of the primary, which are largely probably coastal tanks, or those tanks that allow us to import. By looking at this, one would be able to see how much capacity do we have in respect of that part of the value chain, which is how much capacity do you have in terms of importing capacity, secondary tanks, And maybe in doing that as well, to also indicate which of those are actually mothballed, which are operational, which are mothballed. So, Chair, it's more the enhancement than anything, Chair, but I'm actually happy to note. Thanks.
Thank you very much. With no other hands, I think then it's important that the team notes the enhancement for in the next report. You include that, which will also be more around looking at the individual product lines being stored, so that one can also see things from the product line perspective, instead of lumping crude together with the final products or white products, as they would call it. Advocate Stole, I see your hand is now up.
Yes, Chair, just for clarity, is some of this information in the submission not confidential? Because it specifies areas of where some of these infrastructures are. So I just thought that maybe I should just find out from the team if some of this information is not confidential. And yeah, I think that's what I wanted to get clarity on, because we need to be careful and not to include information that maybe that needs to be deemed or treated confidential. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Advocate Stole. I think it's important in responding to that to even go further to say that information that is confidential, if it's in the report, please mark it as such so that it can be treated in that fashion, so that it can also be blanked out if it goes into the public space. Madam Masetti, I see your hand is up before Mr. Untid responds.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, as part of enhancement on the geographic spread of these facilities and their location, I was going to suggest that apart from just indicating where they are, it might be important to indicate, perhaps, I know that indicate their capacity, not all the other dimensions, but just the capacity, because by so doing, then it gives a sense of the available capacity that is out there in different geographic areas for access to third parties and other consumers. So I think it would be important that we also indicated that the availability of the capacity, the size of the capacity, and also just in terms of the security of supply, so that if we're able to then sort of consolidate the capacity that is available in area A, in geographic area A, and also looking at the demand in that area and the supply capacity in that area. So if we add those other factors, then we will be able to get a sense on the access issues, fair access, as well as the issues of security of supply, and how these facilities can also compete each other in terms of ownership in that particular area. If that can also be done, Chairperson, as part of improvements and also showing the significance of this kind of a report that is done on an annual basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Masetti. I think it's also going to be important, Mr. Untit, when you in response, without really dwelling much on the issue. Because with GIS, you'll have this information provided. Then you've got various overlays, which then carry different levels and layers of information. So if you've got the overlays, the one overlay will talk of the capacity. Then there's the issue of the you can even have a situation where you look at the population in that particular area. So that different aspect, but you need to have your metadata provided in terms of what you want to see in that particular space, which will then talk to capacity. You can even talk to people employed in those areas. You know, there are various overlays which depend on your prioritization of what is important to extract from a GIS. Capacity, for example, will be part and parcel of that. You could be able to click there and also see what is an uncommitted capacity, a variety of things, because then it becomes a useful tool in that regard. And I think that we also need to when we're working on this is why I was saying engage with your colleagues or counterparts at electricity in terms of infrastructure planning, because also it talks to the issue of spatial planning, where you'll have if there's a new development, one then need to think as what will then follow in that. So it becomes important in terms of planning, knowing that energy is the lifeblood of the economy. So I see this as a progressive project in terms of the GIS. Hence, I would say that working together with the other EMs, Madam Twa, if you just assist to have the GIS demonstration, because that is the one that is going to also help members and everyone at NERSA to understand how this needs to be developed and provide guidance in terms of how those overlays must be developed or enhanced. Having said that, Mr. Untit, if you may please just weigh in there.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of, we've noted the comments as per my chat, and we will implement that. In terms of the confidentiality, Chair, through you, CEO, the combined design capacities in terms of the rules and previous decisions by the Regulatory Executive Committee, that is not confidential. What is the operational capacities, and there is several such decisions by the REC where applicants wanted that. But in terms of design capacities, it's not, and only combined consolidated data are provided, not specific. And this is also on our websites already in terms of that, and only where there's national key points, then the overall number of tanks and combined capacities was also not deemed to confidential. Mr. Mkhize has indicated the map for Transnet, which the DMRE in all their presentations is published, but we treat it as confidential. But this specific one is also in documents on Transnet's own website, this specific Transnet system. The more detailed maps, however, are the ones that's confidential. So I think we are confident that we are not breaching any confidentiality based on what we have in this report, CEO.
Thanks for the response, Mr. Untit. If you can just also seek unambiguous clarification from Transnet with regard to figure 12, so that we were clear going forward, because it features in different presentations and we don't want to be misunderstood in that regard. Okay, having noted all of that, the response from the team, may we then move to the recommendation, which is for the PPS to note the report on the geographical spread of licenses issued for petroleum pipelines infrastructure and new entrants into the petroleum pipelines industry during the period 1st April 2021 to 31st March 2022. That is the 2021-2022 financial year, which is attached to this submission. Anyone who supports the noting by show of hands? Thank you, Madam Maseti, Mr. Kumete, Advocate Tole. I also do support the noting. May we then proceed to item 8, which is the infrastructure utilization and third-party access to the petroleum storage facilities. Take the matter as read and just touch on key issues.
Thank you,
Dr.
Chair.
Tolo.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members, management, and colleagues. The submission is for noting. It was supposed to serve at purpose of 9 March, but it was deferred to this meeting because members could not open the document. So the majority of the project that we deal with in PPR are interlinked. Is especially this one is also linked with the one that we've just discussed, the geographical spread. But I'm not going to talk about that. But I would like to make a reference to the methodology submission of 16 February 2022, which was approved by PPS. Pertaining to the methodology, because we mentioned that we've done a survey. So the survey was twofold. There was an aspect dealing with the methodology, and that one was dealt under the methodology submission of 16 February 2022. In this submission, we focus on process-related matters only. Having said that, because the key issue or the question that always comes up is in terms of dealing with the infrastructure. So is what we determine as economic capacity the real problem in terms of access? Why there is no access? Why we don't see a number of emerging players participating in the industry? And that part is covered clearly by on page 57, where one of our licensees, because when we did the survey, there was a questionnaire that went to the licensees, and then there was a questionnaire that went to the petroleum wholesalers. One of our licensees clearly state, it's on page 57 of the submission, that storage is not a bottleneck, is not a challenge. What is the challenge? Is the financial ability for these emerging players to participate. And then that aspect is also comes out of the survey that was done with the petroleum wholesalers, where they also state the issue of funding. So I'm glad that as NERSA, as much as it does not fall under our jurisdiction as far as funding is concerned, but there is something that we've done on funding. But we have attached a document pertaining to that in terms of various role players that we have engaged with in terms of trying to get more information in terms of the funding issues. But what came out of because on the 9th of March, when I presented, the majority of these submissions are interlinked. When I presented the Inland Secretary of Supply, was in terms of zooming in terms of utilization per product. In this submission, that's what we zoom into. Hence, we've sort of identified the facilities with uncommitted capacity, and then where we specify, for example, facility A, which product tanks have got uncommitted capacity. That's annexure B, but on the submission itself, because it was the only standalone document, that annexure B, it was the only standalone annexure. So when they were combining the document, it came after annexure E in terms of the facilities that have been identified to have uncommitted capacity. So having said that, we've done various analysis and we've put them as annexures. I would like the PPS to note the report attached here to as annexure A on the analysis of the infrastructure utilization to determine uncommitted capacity and third-party access at the petroleum storage facilities. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, Dr. Xolo. Any questions, comments, or guidance, members? Are you happy to note? Okay, I take it that the members don't have any questions per se. Oh, yes, Mr. Gumede.
Chair, I was so hesitant to comment, but I think, Chair, for me, this is one area that, as the energy regulator, I'm not sure when we look at ourselves. Dr. Kola has presented the report, and there's this issue on page 57 that says the storage facility is not the limiting factor and whatever. But if we were to be honest with ourselves, how well have we done in this area in terms of access? The case that was raised a number of times, I mean, there's a case I think that we were dealing with that we didn't, I'm not sure how far we actually resolved that. The issue, I think, on the access to pipeline, I think there was an issue, I can't remember how that was resolved. But the issue here for me is, how well have we as NERSA honestly done in this regard? And maybe just the other comment, I just thought that if we're going to put a survey, I'll be concerned, Dr. Kolo, and you are, as an academic, the analysis on paragraph 71 on page 23 of 102, I think, I'm not sure we can conclude anything. The sample there is way too small for us to make any conclusions, and which conclusions may end up, carrying in our minds. We may end up looking at that and saying that concludes. But I don't know whether you would agree as an academic that we could conclude anything from that small sample. But my primary question, Chair, how well do you think we've done? But I'm actually happy to note the report.
Thank you. Dr. Tolo, may I respond, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Mr. Gumede. Maybe let me start with the last question in terms of the sample. That the sample is small. If members remember, before we started, when there was that trigger to do a survey, I had mentioned to members that ever since the 1st of April 2019, when we adopted a new approach in terms of access into storage facilities, where we get copied that we have information to our disposal. So whatever, even if we undertake a survey, for instance, when you look at the survey, we don't just rely on what has been said, but we also analyze that based on the information that we've collected over the years. So based on the information that we've collected over the years, there is really you can cover the whole population, but based on what we've collected, it's sufficient enough to come and stand for whatever point that is raised. So that's why we very confident with the data that with the information that we've collected, because there is additional information outside the survey that we use in terms of debating all of this argument that we brought forward. And then in terms of how well have we done, the other element that I talk about is the issue of funding, where I said it's outside our jurisdiction. Despite that, but we felt as a NERSA, there is a need just to tap into that. And hence we have managed to engage with various financial institutions. Because the issue of funding, even on the survey itself, on both sides, it comes that there is a challenge in terms of the funding. So, for instance, we had mentioned that certain players had signed agreement with one of our licensees, but they couldn't start bringing product because the challenge now was in terms of securing funding. So the funding aspect, there can be agreement in place where you sign that you'll be using a storage facility, but if there's no finance in terms of for you to be able to operate and to bring the product and distribute them, there's nothing that can happen. Hence, we thought on the funding aspect, let us try and gather more information pertaining to that. So there's nothing that can happen going forward if the issue of funding is not addressed. So I'll end up there for now.
Thanks, Dr. Krolo. But I think it's going to be important for you to reflect or enhance the reflection on the sample itself, because you can have a sample that is based on particular players, which may be small in number, but actually it is very representative of those particular players. So just to provide the context when it comes to a sample, to say, is this sample big enough in terms of whether you just to get to, in terms of statistical principles. That is one. Two, there could be also surveys that are not necessarily from a strictly statistical viewpoint, but they give you a certain idea, and then based on that and other factors, you may then draw some conclusions, but not on that particular survey as a standalone. So do provide that context. I think that is going to then assist in addressing the issue of the survey itself and the sufficiency thereof when one looks also from the sample itself. And then two, it's also important for you to look at the complexity of the matter, as you outlined, that we are limited in terms of what we can do, but how far have you gone beyond the call of duty and maybe even taking a step further to assist to deal with the matter? You need to reflect on that, as well as reflect on your policy feedback to see how things could be done differently or the policy structure different such that you are able to address the problem, which then taps into the issue of advocacy, as you have alluded. So I think in future, when you kind of flow in that manner, it will assist the members to clearly understand what you are putting forth in your report. Having said that, members, I just want you to indicate by show of hands if you are happy to note as recommended that the PPS is requested to note the report attached here to as Annexure A on the analysis of the infrastructure utilization to determine uncommitted and third-party access of the petroleum storage facilities. Thank you, Madam Maseti. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Advocate Tole, thank you. I also am happy to note. Thank you, and thanks to everyone that has been following us via our live streaming platforms. This then draws us to the conclusion of the open session of this meeting.